Have you ever wondered if miracles can happen, even in the most unforgiving corners of the wild? In today's story, you're about to witness something that defies logic, challenges everything we thought we knew about animals, and will touch your soul in a way you never expected. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about connection, loss, and a silent bond between a child and a wild creature that no one can fully explain. Deep in the icy heart of Hudson Bay, a remote Inuit village wakes each morning to the stillness only extreme cold can bring. Snow blankets every path, and the wind howls like an ancient whisper. The land here is harsh, home to polar winds, frozen lakes, and creatures shaped by centuries of survival. But something has happened that even the oldest elders can't explain. Every morning, just as the sun begins to push through the frost-bitten horizon, a massive grizzly bear appears at the edge of the village cemetery. He moves slowly, silently, with purpose. And every time, without fail, he walks to the same small grave, the grave of a little girl named Nuvik. The villagers watch from afar. At first, they feared him. After all, this is no tame animal. This is a predator, a symbol of nature's untamed fury. But as the days pass, and the bear returns again and again, fear turns into confusion, then into awe. The bear doesn't dig. He doesn't roar. He doesn't threaten. He mourns. He lies beside the grave, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. On one occasion, he even brought branches, carefully placed like an offering. Nobody taught him to do this. Nobody could have. Why is this bear here? What brought him to the grave of a child he seemingly never knew? What does he feel? Or could it be that he does remember her? Word of the bear spreads quickly, first to nearby communities, then across provinces. Then, suddenly, the world is watching. Videos flood social media showing the bear's haunting routine. Experts, scientists, and wildlife trackers are baffled. Could this be grief? Recognition? Repayment? Or is it something more? What we do know is that months before her death, little Nuvik had a habit of leaving food outside her home. Apples, fish scraps, always in the same spot. For my forest friends, she used to say. And yes, one of those forest friends may have been him. This isn't a fairy tale. It's real, documented, witnessed by an entire village frozen in time, trying to make sense of what they're seeing. And now you're here hearing it too. But trust me, this is only the beginning. What happens next will leave you breathless. Before we dive deeper into the mystery, you need to know who Nuvik was, because without her, none of this would make sense. Nuvik was just 6 years old when the village lost her, a bright soul with eyes full of light and an unusual tenderness for the natural world. She wasn't like other children. While most feared the howls of wolves at night or the quiet rumble of snowstorms approaching, Nuvik was never afraid. She would watch the trees sway, talk to the birds, and every single morning, no matter how cold, she'd take scraps of dried fish, pieces of apple or half-eaten bannock and quietly place them behind her house near the tree line. She called it her gift corner. When her parents asked why, she answered simply, "It's where the animals come to say thank you." They thought it was just the imagination of a child, sweet but innocent. What they didn't know was that a set of paw prints had been showing up more and more frequently near those offerings. Massive ones. Much too large for a dog or a fox, the prints belonged to a bear. And not just any bear. This one had a torn right ear, a unique scar along his shoulder, and eyes that looked thoughtful, like he knew things. He had no name then, but the village would later call him a klak, the Inuit word for bear. Now here's something incredible. Nuvik never tried to approach him, and he never tried to approach her, but they saw each other, sometimes through the window, sometimes at a distance. There was trust but never touch, respect but never interference, a quiet, sacred understanding. Then came that tragic day. It was midwinter, and Nuvik had wandered closer to the frozen lake than usual. Everyone knew the ice had been thinning in recent years, a cruel reminder of changing climates. She slipped, fell through. By the time help arrived, it was too late. The village fell into silence. The sky itself seemed darker, and her grave, nestled near a small group of birch trees, became a place of sorrow, until Aklak came. And from that moment, everything changed. He appeared days after her burial, walked through the snow, slowly, purposefully, as if he had followed an invisible trail, a scent not just of body, but of memory. He laid down beside her resting place and stayed. No growl, no chaos, just presence. Since then, the visits haven't stopped. Some say animals don't feel emotions the way humans do, but those who've seen Aklak with their own eyes, the way he lowers his head near her grave, the way he never disrupts a single flower, know better. This bear is grieving, or remembering, or maybe both, and just maybe. He came to say thank you, but the question remains, why here? Why her? Why now? The answer may lie in something even deeper, not just in the memory of food or kindness, but in the ancient understanding between human and animal, one that has existed long before cameras, before the internet, before science could explain it. Because Aklak wasn't just any bear, and Nuvik wasn't just any child. And what happened next will challenge everything we think we know about how animals feel, remember, and love. The first time Aklak appeared at the cemetery, it sent a wave of panic through the village. People shouted, doors slammed, a few even prepared rifles, just in case. After all, a fully grown grizzly bear wandering so close to homes was anything but ordinary. He could have been starving, aggressive, dangerous. But Aklak wasn't any of those things. He simply stood there, still. As the snow fell over his fur and the wind pushed across the open white land, he made no move toward the people, the homes, or even the trash bins, the usual attraction for a wild bear near civilization. He walked slowly toward Nuvik's grave. Some villagers said he was sniffing, searching. Others watched in stunned silence as the bear gently circled the little mound of snow-covered earth before settling, down beside it. And he stayed. For over an hour. The local priest, who had buried Nuvik days before, stood frozen near the edge of the cemetery. He whispered, "It's like he knows she's here." From that day on, Aklak returned. Not just once or twice, but every morning. Without fail. Even in blizzards. Even when the wind cut so sharply across the tundra it could tear through cloth. Even when the sun didn't rise for days, and darkness swallowed the land. He came, and with each visit, fear began to fade, replaced by questions and awe. Was it possible this bear was mourning? Animals are known to grieve, yes. Elephants cry over the bones of their dead, dogs wait at their owners' graves. But a wild bear? Visiting the grave of a human child? Experts from southern Canada, curious and skeptical, made the journey north. Wildlife trackers set up cameras at a distance. They observed Aklak from afar, analyzing his posture, his breathing, the path he took through the snow. It was always the same. He approached with calm. He stopped at her grave, and he rested. He didn't dig. He didn't growl. He never once showed aggression, not even when the villagers watched, filmed, or whispered from a distance. He simply stayed, head bowed low, as if listening for something that could only be heard in silence. It was one of these mornings that he did something that stunned everyone. Aklak disappeared into the woods just before sunrise, and when he returned hours later, he was carrying something in his mouth. It was a small bundle of sticks, some still green. With careful movements, he placed them at the foot of the grave, not dropped, but arranged, and then, as before, he lay down beside it. This was not instinct. This was intention. A wave of emotion swept through the village. Some cried openly. Others stood in reverent stillness, unsure of how to explain what they were witnessing. One elder simply said, "The spirits walk with him, and he walks with hers." Children began leaving drawings for Aklak, flowers, even fish, in the same place Nuvik used to offer them. And each day, the bear continued his pilgrimage. But not everyone believed. Some accused the village of staging the visits. Others said the bear was just conditioned by the scent of food or human contact. that there was no real connection. But those who lived there, who watched, who felt the energy in that place each morning, knew better. This was not about food. This was about presence. Akhlaq came not for the body beneath the earth, but for the memory of what once stood above it. A little girl with a heart open enough to give without asking. A girl who saw no danger in the wild, only kinship. And somehow, this bear had felt that too. But what no one knew then, what the cameras didn't catch and the scientists couldn't explain, was that Akhlaq's connection to Nuvik had only just begun. Because in the days to come, he would go beyond grief. He would act. And the world would watch in disbelief. As the days turned into weeks, Akhlaq's presence at the cemetery became something sacred, a ritual both haunting and beautiful. The village began to adjust its routines around him. People rose earlier just to catch a glimpse. Children, once warned to stay away, were now led to the edges of the burial ground in silence, so they could witness a moment that many believed was not only rare, but holy. But the attention grew far beyond the small community. A video of Akhlaq lying beside Nuvik's grave, his massive body half covered in snow, his head resting gently on the white earth, made its way to the internet, and it spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours, the video had over 20 million views. News networks picked up the story. The Morning Bear of Hudson Bay, they called him. Wildlife experts were interviewed. Theories emerged. Debates began. Was this grief? Memory? Was the bear anthropomorphized, or was it something we had simply never documented until now? But while the outside world speculated, tension inside the village quietly escalated. Not everyone was comfortable with the bear's visits becoming global spectacle. Some feared the growing number of visitors, journalists, filmmakers, even influencers, would disrupt Akhlaq's path. What if someone got too close? What if he felt threatened? What if something terrible happened? And then there was another group, smaller but vocal, who insisted it was time to drive him away. "It's a wild animal," one man said during a town meeting. "We're playing with nature, and one day we'll pay for it." Arguments broke out. Was Akhlaq a symbol of beauty, or a walking danger? Should he be left alone, or tranquilized and relocated? In the middle of the debate stood Elder Tulamak, Nuvik's great-aunt and one of the most respected voices in the community. She stood slowly at the center of the gathering and said just one thing: "Let him grieve, like we grieve. He is not here to hurt. He is here to remember." Her words silenced the room. That night, when Akhlaq arrived at the cemetery once again, no one interfered. A circle of lanterns had been placed gently in the snow, not to keep him out but to guide him in. A path of light from the tree line to the grave. He followed it. He lay beside the tombstone, and for the first time, he let out a sound. A low, deep exhale, somewhere between a sigh and a hum. A release of something invisible, but profound. It echoed through the trees, and no one said a word. In the following days, something shifted. Akhlaq didn't come alone. From the edge of the forest, 2 other bears were seen lingering behind him, smaller, more hesitant. A mother and cub, perhaps siblings. No one could be sure, but they kept their distance, watching as Akhlaq made his way to the grave, as he always did. This time, though, he didn't lie down immediately. Instead, he stood still beside Nuvik's tomb, looking toward the trees. And slowly, deliberately, he turned his head back, as if inviting the others forward. But they didn't move. They stayed in the shadows, uncertain. The villagers watching from afar didn't know what to make of it. The cameras continued rolling. The world continued watching. Scientists speculated endlessly, but none of them predicted what Akhlaq would do next. He left, without lying down, without placing anything. He walked away from the grave, back toward the forest, not in fear, but with quiet resolve. And the others followed. The grave was empty for the first time in weeks. The villagers waited the next morning, and the next. But Akhlaq did not return. It was as if the moment had passed. The cycle was over. The ritual complete. But on the third day, something unexpected appeared. At sunrise, near Nuvik's grave, were branches. Fresh, arranged in a gentle arc at the base of the stone. No footsteps. No sign of the bear. Just the offering. It happened again 2 days later. A string of shells, possibly pulled from the riverbank, placed carefully beside the flowers left by the children. Each object was different. Each time it was left without witness. People began waking up earlier, hoping to catch a glimpse. But a clock never came during daylight again. He had become a phantom, present, yet unseen. A new reverence swept through the village. A clock was no longer just a bear. He was a memory keeper, a silent guardian of the girl who had once given with no expectation of return. News media moved on. The world found new stories to follow. But for the people of Hudson Bay, something had changed forever. Because every few days, even months later, something new would appear at the grave. Wildflowers, bits of woven grass, sometimes just a smooth stone placed precisely at the center of the wooden cross above her name. The question now was no longer, why does the bear come? It was, why does he still remember? And perhaps even deeper, what do animals know of love and loss that we've forgotten? Something told the villagers they hadn't seen the end of a clock. And one morning, under a violet sky brushed with snowlight, he proved them right. He came again, not in silence this time, but with a presence that stirred the air itself. The first to see him was a fisherman returning early from the frozen river. Through the mist, a clock's form emerged, taller, broader, yet slower now, his fur dusted with snow, his movements deliberate. He made his way, as he had done before, toward the small birch grove. But this time, something was different. In his mouth, he carried not sticks, not fish, not leaves, but a single item wrapped in fabric, a piece of cloth, faded and soft, fluttering lightly with each step. Someone recognized it as one of Nuvik's old scarves, lost months before, likely caught by the wind and forgotten. How he had found it, no one could say. He placed it on the grave, not at the foot, but gently, near the headstone, as if tucking her in. Then, for the first time in almost 2 months, a clock lay down beside it again. Not curled tightly as before, but stretched along the earth, head raised, eyes half closed, facing the trees. The sun was rising behind him, casting a gold hue over the snow. In that moment he looked like a monument, etched into the land, shaped by sorrow, forged in memory. No one approached. No one dared to break the stillness. The only sound was the slow rustle of the trees and the whisper of breath in the cold. Then a clock lifted his head toward the sky and let out a low, resonant growl. It wasn't aggressive. It was deep, ancient, almost like a song. A release, a declaration, or perhaps a goodbye. When he stood again, he didn't look back. He walked with the weight of something finished, something fulfilled. He disappeared into the woods before anyone could follow. But the grave wasn't empty. The scarf remained, and so did the memory of the moment, etched into every soul who had seen it. From that day on, no one questioned the story. No one tried to explain it away. A clock had come not just to mourn, but to honor, to keep something alive that could not be seen or touched, but could be felt, deeply. And as spring crept over the horizon and the snow began to melt, revealing patches of earth and life again, the villagers began to notice something small, but remarkable. Around the grave, wildflowers had begun to grow, in a near-perfect ring, flowers that had not bloomed there before. No one planted them. No one disturbed them. They simply came. Like him, the flowers spread slowly, almost shyly at first. Pale purples, soft whites, and tiny bursts of yellow pushing through the thawed earth as if drawn by some invisible pull. They framed the grave gently, like nature itself was cradling the memory of the little girl who had once offered fish and apples to the forest. Elder Tulemak visited every morning, just as Nuvik used to. She never touched the flowers. She would sit nearby, eyes closed, murmuring ancient prayers in a language older than most remembered. She said nothing to the others about what she felt there, only that the earth had chosen to remember, And even in the absence of the bear, his presence was still everywhere. Parents told the story to their children, who listened wide-eyed and silent. Tourists stopped coming. The cameras stopped rolling. But the story endured. Once during the quiet dusk of an early summer evening, a group of children playing near the tree line claimed to have seen him again. Just his silhouette, far in the distance against the fading light. He didn't come closer. He didn't approach the village. He only stood, watching for a moment, then disappeared into the trees. No one doubted them. The villagers had begun leaving offerings again. Not food, not gifts. Just simple things. A drawing, a stone with a child's name written on it, a handful of pine needles shaped into a circle. And the grave remained untouched, pristine, surrounded by growing life, guarded by something unseen. The question no longer needed an answer. The bond between Aklak and Nuvik had become more than story, more than memory. It was a truth that lived in the stillness, in the wind, in the eyes of those who stood silently before her grave and felt something they could not name. Years later, long after the flowers became part of the landscape, someone carved words into a piece of driftwood and placed it at the edge of the birch trees. It read, "He came not to say goodbye, but to promise he would never forget." And every spring, just before the snow fully melts, the first flower that blooms beside Nuvik's grave is always the same. A single, violet lupine, standing tall in the cold soil, swaying softly, as if waiting. No one knows exactly why it's always the lupine. Perhaps it was the last flower she picked. Perhaps it grows where his paw once rested. Or perhaps it's simply the way the earth chose to remember them both. One bloom for one life, renewed each year in silence. What is certain is that the story no longer belongs to one village or one bear or one child. It belongs to everyone who's ever believed that love can cross boundaries we don't understand, between species, between worlds, between what is seen and what is felt. Visitors who arrive now don't come with cameras. They come quietly. They sit by the birch trees and leave in silence, some wiping tears they didn't expect, others still unsure of what they felt, but certain it was real. Sometimes, on the edge of twilight, faint impressions appear in the soil near the grave. Not footprints exactly, too blurred, too large, too light, but enough to suggest something has passed through, something watching, something remembering. It became tradition in the village to never speak loudly near her resting place. Children are taught to whisper their greetings, as if she and Aklak are both still listening, as if they never truly left. And maybe, in some way, they haven't. Elder Tulimak says there's a word in her language that has no perfect English translation. It means a kind of memory that lives outside of time, a remembering that does not fade. That's what this has become, a remembering. Of kindness given without expectation, of a bond formed without words, of a loss carried not just by humans, but by something wild and free, and of a promise, whispered each year by a single violet flower, that some connections can never be broken. Each spring, when that lone lupine reappears, the villagers pause. It's not an event marked on calendars or announced in gatherings, but it's felt. A quiet acknowledgement passes between neighbors, between generations. They look to the horizon toward the trees and remember. Some say Aklak still roams the forest beyond Hudson Bay, that he's older now, slower, but still carries the memory of the child who once saw him not as a beast, but as a friend. Others believe he was only meant to stay for a season, that his role was never to remain, but to awaken something long forgotten in all of them. And yet, the feeling never left. Even in the quietest winters, when the snow falls heavier than ever, when the winds scream through the trees, there's still a sense of presence, as if something watches over the resting place, as if the land itself remembers their story. Children who never met Nuvik grow up hearing her name as though she were a sister. They know the tale by heart, how she gave without fear, how the bear came not to take, but to give back, how grief found a new language, one that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. New drawings are placed at her grave each year. Some are crude, just stick figures holding hands with a bear. Others are carefully painted with colors and names, some with messages written in unsteady handwriting. Thank you for teaching us. We won't forget. You are loved. And still every spring, the first flower to rise is that single, unwavering lupine. Bright, defiant, unexplainable. It bends in the wind, sways with the breath of the earth, and stands as proof that not everything precious can be touched or measured or even fully understood. Some truths are simply felt. And in the frozen silence of a northern land, where sorrow once fell like snow and fear once stood at every door, something beautiful took root, not just in the ground beneath the birch trees, but in the hearts of everyone who heard the story. It grew quietly, like the lupine itself, soft, steady, unstoppable. The story wove its way into lullabies sung at night, into carvings on wooden walls, into the gentle way the villagers spoke of life and death, and the children, those born years after Aklak's last visit, felt as if they'd known him, as if they too had once stood beside the grave and seen the great bear lay down in the snow. Some drew him in school, towering but gentle, eyes closed in peace. Others wrote poems about him, about Nuvik, about the bond they shared. Even the elders began to say less and feel more. The mystery no longer needed solving. It only needed honoring. And the forest, too, seemed changed. Animals came closer to the village than before, yet never threatened. The wolves howled less at night. Birds gathered in strange, symmetrical patterns above the cemetery during the last weeks of spring. The villagers noticed, but never disturbed. They had learned not everything is meant to be questioned. Some things are meant to be witnessed quietly, with reverence. Years passed. The tree line grew thicker, and the path Aklak once walked became harder to trace. But no one forgot, not even as the world changed around them. The story endured, passed on from voice to voice, from heart to heart. They say memory is fragile. That time erases what it doesn't understand. But in Hudson Bay, memory lives in the snow, in the silence, in the single flower that blooms year after year without fail. And though no one has seen the bear in many seasons now, the villagers never speak of him in the past tense, because what he left behind is still alive. It lives in the quiet steps people take when approaching the grave. It lives in the way parents teach their children to leave offerings not for reward, but out of kindness. It lives in the stories whispered at dusk when the wind is soft and the stars begin to appear over the treetops. And still, the lupine comes. Even in the harshest springs when other plants fail to bloom, that single flower rises. Sometimes it leans, sometimes it's smaller, but it never fails to return. It stands where Aklak once stood, rooted in the same soil that held both loss and love. Travelers who hear of the tale and make the journey to Hudson Bay are often met not with spectacle, but with silence. They find no signs, no guided tours, no plaques, only a path marked by footsteps and a small grave framed by birch trees and soft color. They stand before it unsure of what to say, but they feel it. And some say if you arrive just before dawn, when the world is still between sleep and waking, you might hear something in the distance, a sound low and deep, carried on the wind. A sound not meant to frighten but to remind that grief can be shared, that kindness is never forgotten, that love, once given, does not vanish with time. In the far corners of the forest, where light filters through snow-laden branches, a shadow might still move, broad, slow, steady, unbothered by the passing of years, guarding something precious, invisible to most, but undeniable to those who believe. The villagers don't chase it. They don't follow it. They simply wait. Because some stories are not meant to end. They are meant to echo. And in that echo there is peace. Not the kind born of answers or explanations, but the quiet, steady peace that settles when something sacred has been witnessed. When a connection is so pure, so inexplicable, that it demands no proof to be real. Each season folds into the next, and the land keeps its rhythm. The snow returns, and with it, the silence. The river freezes, the birch trees stand bare, and the stars burn a little brighter in the clear northern sky. On certain nights, when the village sleeps and only the winds speak, Footprints appear once again in the snow near the edge of the forest. Just a few, just enough, wide and deep, vanishing before the sun can catch them. No one tries to follow them anymore. They are signs, not trails. A quiet reminder that something watches still. Not as a guardian, not as a ghost, but as a memory made flesh, walking among trees that once knew a child and a bear who shared something the world still struggles to name. The villagers gather on the anniversary of Nuvik's passing. Not with sorrow, but with stillness. They bring lanterns, small drawings, and sometimes a single offering, an apple, a piece of dried fish, a handmade scarf left gently at the base of her stone. No words are needed. They wait until the first light touches the trees. And when it does, someone always points. The lupine. There, again, unshaken, alive, blooming. Its petals catch the morning light, trembling softly in the breeze as if stirred by more than just wind. A color too vivid for the cold ground, too tender for a place born of loss. Yet it stands as it always does, proof of something enduring. Children press their palms together as they gaze at it, as though in the presence of something divine. Elders bow their heads. No one touches it. No one dares. It is sacred now, not just a flower, but a symbol, a bridge between two worlds. And just beyond the trees, where the forest thickens and the human eye begins to lose its way, the silence shifts. Not broken, not disturbed, just altered. As if something old stirs in the earth, as if the trees remember. Some say a clock is long gone, that his spirit returned to the wild that birthed him. Others say he's still out there, moving through the snow like a shadow of memory, a whisper of the bond he once carried so carefully. But no one argues about what happened anymore, because the land remembers, because the flower returns, because even in the deepest winter, a warmth remains. It lives not in fire or shelter, but in story, in the kind that's passed from mouth to mouth without changing, because it needs no embellishment, the kind that becomes a part of who we are. And in Hudson Bay, every time someone kneels beside that small snow-kissed grave, they know he was real, she was real, and what they shared still breathes in the roots beneath their feet. It breathes in the wind that moves between the birch trees. It hums in the stillness before the snow falls. It lingers in the silence after footsteps fade. A presence not seen but felt, like the memory of a voice you never heard but somehow remember. Long after the village changes, when houses are rebuilt and generations shift, the story holds its place. Children who were once told the tale by their grandparents now tell it to their own. They point to the grove and say, "That's where he came. That's where she waited." Some bring visitors to the site, guiding them with quiet reverence as though leading them into a temple. They say little along the way. They let the land speak for itself. And when they arrive, the visitors rarely know what to expect. But almost all of them cry. Not because the story is sad, but because it's true. Because it reminds them of something they may have forgotten, that the world is capable of gentleness, even in its wildest corners. That love can take forms beyond our understanding. That memory, when held with grace, does not fade. It blooms. And so they leave a token, a ribbon, a note, a feather, a stone from their homeland. Small things, left not to impress but to connect. One more layer in the quiet mosaic built around the grave. One more sign that this story does not end. And each year, as spring draws near, the village waits. The ground softens. The snow begins to recede. The wind carries scents of earth and thaw. And then, without fail, the first bloom appears. A single violet lupine, rising through the cold, opening toward the sky, not with urgency, but with patience, as if it knows there is no rush. As if it understands that some things return not because they must, but because they were never truly gone. The lupine remains for weeks, even as others bloom and fade around it. It stands quietly among the newer flowers, never taller, never brighter, but always there first, always constant. Some say it grows from the very spot where Aklak once laid his head. Others believe it carries Nuvik's spirit, that it blooms not from the earth, but from memory. The truth doesn't need to be settled. Not here. The story lives not in facts, but in the way hearts respond to it. In the way people pause when they see the flower. In the hush that falls over the cemetery as spring takes hold. As years pass, the village grows. Roads are paved. Technology reaches farther. And new voices rise. But still the path to the birch grove remains untouched. It winds through snowdrifts and frost-bitten grass, curving toward that sacred place with quiet dignity. No signs, no fences, just presence. Visitors leave with more than photos. They leave with something they can't explain. A weight in the chest, a softness behind the eyes, a knowing. Sometimes they return, sometimes they never speak of it again. But no one who walks that path forgets. And in quiet corners of the world where wild still touches the human, people tell the story. Around fires, in whispers, in books and classrooms. They say, once a bear came to a girl's grave, not for food, not for warmth, but for love. And that love did not die. It waited. It remembered. It bloomed. If this story has stayed with you, if something inside you stirred while you listened, hold on to it. Let it become part of how you see the world. Because stories like this are not just meant to be heard, they're meant to be carried. Somewhere, right now, someone else needs to believe that compassion can live in places untouched by language. That grief can be shared by paws and hands alike. That kindness given without reason can echo long after we're gone. So stay with us. There are more stories to be told. Stories of connection, of survival, of moments between species that defy what we think we know. Stories where instinct becomes empathy, and silence says everything. Subscribe now, and join a community that sees the wild not just as a place of danger, but as a mirror of ourselves. A place where love can take the shape of fur and claws, of flowers and snow. And as this story fades from screen but not from memory, another one is waiting for you, already blooming on the edge of the next chapter. It's right there, on the screen. Click it, and keep walking the path with us.